All right, welcome back to another week of ICU Doc Talk, the ICU Doctor. And today I'm going to be talking about the heart. What is the heart? What are all the problems that go wrong with the heart? What are the surgeries that are done? What are the therapies that are done for the heart? And from there, it's going to be a general overview of the heart. This is for both medical people and non-medical people. I'm going to try to keep it an even balance between the two. We're going to be talking about the heart for this entire podcast, so let's do it. Now, a couple caveats. So I am double board certified in critical care and anesthesiology. I am not a cardiologist, and I'm not a cardiothoracic surgeon. So am I an expert on the heart? I guess not technically like an expert, but I work in a cardiac ICU, and I deal a lot with cardiac patients, and so I do know a lot about the heart, and I read a lot of literature about cardiac surgery. So it is like kind of my niche field a little bit. But take things with a grain of salt. I'm not like I'm not a cardiologist, and a cardiologist knows much more than me, and a cardiothoracic surgeon knows a lot more than me about a lot of things that have to do with the heart. But that's why I'm just gonna keep it a general overview. I'm gonna kind of categorize the heart into like four basic categories. And again, if I had more time, I'd probably be a little more like formal with this, but I don't have time to like sit down and write a whole lecture and stuff. So I'm really kind of do this on a seat of my pants here. So the four categories we're going to talk about the heart today is the muscle, the actual muscle of the heart, the valves of the heart, the vessels of the heart, and the electrical system of the heart. Okay, those four things. So backing up a little bit, what is the heart? Why is it different than other organs? It's a pump. I know I'm stating the obvious here. It is a pump, and it's a muscle. It's a muscle, it's a pump, and it's just sitting there pumping away and circulating blood around your body right now. There is a left side of your heart, and there's a right side of your heart. And that's really the way to think of it. There's four chambers of your heart. There's the atria, which receive blood that pump it down into the ventricles, and the ventricles pump the blood out. The right side of the heart the right ventricle pumps blood to your lungs. The blood goes to the lungs. Blood that doesn't have oxygen, it receives the oxygen, and then it pumps it all to the left side of your heart. And then your left side of your heart pumps the blood out through your aorta. And the aorta is like the highway that pumps really great oxygenated blood to the rest of your body. So you have the right side of the heart, you have the left side of the heart. The distinction, if you're not aware, the distinction between these two, the right side and left side of the heart, is not just like a fun fact. It is essential to understanding how the heart works. They are incredibly different they have very, very different roles, and they both have very different pathologies. And they are very different. The left side of the heart and the right side of the heart are very, very different from one another. And you can have a disease with the right side and not the left side, and vice versa. And you must know what's going on with both sides of the heart to be able to treat it appropriately when disease happens to the heart. So the heart obviously is an organ, right? But it's totally different than like the liver. It's completely different than the lungs. It's completely different from the kidneys. So like the lungs and so you take something like the kidneys and the liver. These have way different functions, right? The kidney helps to maintain your like electrolytes. It helps to maintain your blood pressure. It does a lot of things. We're not talking about the kidneys. The liver does an unbelievable amount of things. It synthesizes clotting factors. It helps to metabolize things you eat into a package of cholesterol, and it helps with a ton of things. So there's a lot of like biochemical processes happening in these other organs. That's not what the heart. The heart is a pump. It's a mechanical thing. It's just a thing that's pumping. That is what the heart is. So it's in a way it's more simple than other organs. That's kind of what distinguishes it. One of the reasons it's so important to talk about the heart, it is a major source of death, right? In like the Western world, people die from heart disease. What does heart disease mean? You just hear that. So many different types of things can disease the heart. That's what we're gonna get into. We're gonna get into all these different pathological states that the heart can get into, and what we do about it. Okay, so again, the four categories. We're going to talk about the muscle of the heart. We're going to talk about the valves of the heart, the vessels of the heart, and the electrical conduction system. So let's start with the muscle. So the heart is a muscle, literally. It's literally a muscle. Okay, it has these proteins called actin and myosin that contract when they're exposed with calcium, and it's a very complex metabolic process that we're not going to, biochemical process that I'm not going to get into detail. For one thing, I'm far from those details, right? Those are the details that you kind of learn in med school, the biochemistry, and I really want to talk about like clinically what we do. So the heart muscle contracts in a very organized way. in order to get blood pumping throughout your body, through your lungs and back to the rest of your body. So in a normal functioning heart, the atria, as they said, they bring the blood in. You might want to pause and just like Google heart. So you just look at the basic anatomy. So you kind of have it, you're a little oriented with what I'm talking about. So the atria are their own chambers that the actual walls of the heart are made of muscle. They pump blood down to the ventricles. The ventricles are more beefier muscle, and then that pumps blood into the rest of the body. The left side is beefier muscle. It's much stronger than the right side of the heart. The right side is not as strong as the left side. Why? Because the left side is pumping blood to the rest of the entire body. It is responsible for the entire load of pushing blood to every organ system. Your brain, down to your kidneys, down to the tips of your toes. The left side of your heart is responsible for all that. The right side of your heart is only needed to pump to your lungs, as I said before. So the right side of the heart is kind of a little bit of a floppier muscle. It's like thinner. And the left side of the heart is more of a beefier, thicker muscle. Now the coordination, it must be coordinated very well. You can't just have disorganized, you can't just have like a muscle just kind of like spasming, at random times. It must be a coordinated, concerted effort of muscle contraction, right? If the muscle's not contracting all in a good way, in a productive way, that's basically what ventricular fibrillation is. That word fibrillation means just like the muscles quivering and not contracting in an organized way. Now, one of the ways to make sure that the muscle is contracting in an organized way is to send an electrical current down the heart that makes the muscle contract in this organized, sequential way. And so the heart has its own nervous system. It has a bundle of nerves that go down the middle of it and spread up down the bottom, up the top, that help the heart contract in a significant way that makes meaningful work, that actually pumps blood. So the heart has its own electrical conduction system. So something can go wrong in the muscle, where things are wrong. Something can go wrong in the conduction system. Now, with valves, you have 4 valves in your heart. You have two valves between your atria and your ventricles, and you have 2 valves between and then you have 2 valves between the ventricles and the pulmonary artery or the aorta. So why does the heart have valves? Why does it have valves? What's the point of it? The valves create, well, there's many reasons, but the valves create blood pressure. So if you just have a pump that just pumps water, right? So just imagine let's take the heart. Let's just imagine a single chamber heart, which is one chamber, and it pumps blood. So that's systole. That's what systole is called. When the heart is pumping, when it's contracting, that's systole. And then it needs to relax. And as it relaxes, that's called diastole as it relaxes, right? As it's relaxing, it then needs to fill back up with blood. A valve is what, let's just take the left side of the heart. A valve is what prevents the blood from flowing back down into the chamber so that it can actually relax and receive blood from the atria, from the other side of the heart. So it's a way to keep blood going forward. That's the point of valves, is to create, and that creates blood pressure. So systole or systolic pressure. Remember this, the blood pressure, it's like 120/80. The top number is systole, the bottom number is diastole. The systole is the blood pressure while your heart is contracting. The diastole is the blood pressure while your heart is relaxing. Okay. So you have valves, and then you have vessels. So how does the heart muscle needs blood flow to it, just like any other organ. How do your kidneys get blood? From the renal arteries, which come directly off of the aorta. Well, how does your heart get fed blood? One would think, well, it's a pump. It's constantly full of blood, so it just like diffuses through the muscle. That's not true. A little tiny bit of blood of the muscle gets it from direct diffusion, but the heart needs its own blood supply, and those are through the coronary arteries. And here's the cool thing: the aorta, right? It's like the main highway to the rest of the body, and has all these takeoffs, right? All these arteries that take off from it and feed different organs. The very first takeoffs immediately from the aorta are the coronary arteries. And they come right off the aorta, and they come and they wrap around the heart, and their arteries directly to the heart, and they feed the heart the blood and oxygen that it needs. And then you can have issues with the vessels, and that's another source of disease. All right. So again, this is the 4 categories. We're talking about muscles, we're talking about the electrical conduction system, we're talking about valves, and we're talking about the vessels. So I swear, okay, let's talk about the muscle. And let's talk about different pathologies that can happen with the actual muscle of the heart. Well, first there's congestive heart failure, CHF. I'm sure you've heard of this before. Congestive heart failure. That's a scary word for non-medical people. like, oh my gosh, my mom has heart failure. What does that mean? It doesn't, for one thing, congestive heart failure, CHF, does not mean that that person is in imminent danger of dying soon. It could be. They could have end-stage heart failure. But congestive heart failure is a chronic, long-term disease that someone can live with and that can be mitigated or be treated with different therapies. Congestive heart failure, or CHF. Now, heart failure can be caused by a couple. It's kind of a non-specific term. It can be the failing of the actual muscle itself can be caused by a variety of things. One thing we call ischemic heart disease. So chronic ischemic means like low blood flow or no blood flow to an organ. So ischemic heart disease means chronic low blood flow to the organ, which can cause from coronary artery disease. The coronary arteries that are feeding the muscle start getting worse and worse, like blocked off from atherosclerosis, which is a disease of blood vessels. So that kind of dovetails with that. But having high blood pressure can cause what we call hypertrophy of your muscle. Hypertrophy means the muscle itself gets thicker, and that's not good. If the muscle itself gets thicker, it's responding to high blood pressure. So if your blood pressure gets higher and higher, your heart, the left side of your heart, has to pump harder and harder against that, and it just builds up its muscle and more to keep up with that, and that's bad for your heart. That can cause worsening heart failure. Diabetes can cause heart failure. Other kind of non-specific cardiomyopathies, myocarditis, infections, alcoholism, methamphetamine use, different drug uses can cause heart failure. So there's a lot of roads lead to heart failure, and heart failure is a spectrum of diseases. It can be mild, it can be severe. So one of the classic findings of heart failure is being volume overloaded. Just too much like water is building up in your tissues because your heart cannot keep up with the demand of pumping blood flow, blood through the heart and through the rest of your body. It gets backed up into your venous system, and that gets backed up into your the tissues of your body. So like if someone's legs can be really, really swollen because they're in heart failure, or a bunch of blood, that blood can get backed up into the liver, and the liver you can go into liver disease because you have heart failure. That's called a congestive hepatopathy. Congestive meaning it backs up into, it's congestive. That's why it's called congestive heart failure. The blood flow becomes congested. Probably should have said it at the onset. And then hepatopathy means liver disease, disease of the liver. So you can go to liver failure because you're in heart failure. You can go into kidney failure because you're in heart failure. That's congestive nephropathy. Again, the blood flow, the drainage of blood flow from the kidneys gets backed up, and that hurts the kidneys. With volume overload, your sodium can get diluted out, and having low sodium levels can be associated with bad heart failure as well. One of the reasons you need to avoid high salt diets if you have congestive heart failure is when you eat salt and sodium chloride, and you eat salt and it goes in your bloodstream, that draws more fluid into your bloodstream, and your heart can't keep up with that, and then you get more fluid backing up. So you need to be on a low salt diet if you're someone with congestive heart failure. Along with that fluid overload, you get volume, blood and interstitial fluid, we call it, gets backed up into your lungs. And that can make it very difficult to breathe. It can make it hard to lay down flat. When someone has bad CHF, heart failure, when they lay down, they can feel like they're drowning. So you can be really short of breath. When someone has heart failure, they're usually treated with diuretics, like Lasix, or which is called furosemide, or Bumex, bumetanide, or torsemide. Medications that they're called loop diuretics. They encourage your kidneys to dump to get rid of fluid. So you pee more, you urinate more, and that helps and that's a mainstay therapy of having chronic heart failure, congestive heart failure. So people can live with heart failure for years. They can either do lifestyle modifications. There's not a lot of lifestyle modifications you can do, but if someone has a substance use disorder, to like alcoholism or other illicit drugs, cessation of those things is extremely important to stop the disease progression. But a lot of people live for a long time with heart failure. But then you can develop end-stage heart failure, where your heart gets worse and worse, and you can be in a state of dying. And one of the therapies that we can do, that a heart surgeon could come along and put what's called an LVAD, a left ventricular assist device, which is basically a little pump that they open up your heart and they slap on this pump. They literally bore a hole into the muscle of your heart, and it's a pump that assists the left side of your heart. usually the left side, almost always. It's a pump that helps pump the blood from your left ventricle into your aorta. Now, not everybody's a candidate for this. Sometimes we use it as a bridge to like getting a transplant, or sometimes it's what we call destination therapy, and it can extend someone's life by a couple of years by putting one of these in, which is of course is something that is worth it, that we should seek after. All right, obviously I could talk much more about these things. We're going to move on to the next category, valvular disease, the valves. Something that's, you can have things that go wrong with every single one of your valves. Why don't we start with, so again, maybe bring up a picture of all the valves so you can kind of get an idea of the valves between the chambers if you're not familiar. But let's just talk about the basic things that can go wrong in each valve. Let's start with the aortic valve. So that's the valve between the left ventricle and the aorta. Obviously, that's why it's called the aortic valve. So what can go wrong with this valve? Well, it can be too tight. You can't pump enough through it. That's called aortic stenosis. Or it can be too loose. It's too open and blood backs into it. During diastole, as the heart relaxes, blood comes back down, and that's called aortic regurgitation or aortic insufficiency. Now, people can live with these things, a valvular disease like that, for a while and not know it. Usually, when someone becomes symptomatic, they're short of breath, blood is backing up into their lungs, and fluid is backing up into the lungs. They, can get an echo, and then it's revealed that they have that. And sometimes you need to have surgery on your aortic valve. You need to have it replaced. That's a version of very major cardiac surgery. When this valve is no longer competent, it gets so calcified, literally just calcium is caked on there. Some people have a congenital bicuspid valve. It should be a tricuspid valve, like three cusps. Sometimes have a bicuspid valve. That makes you susceptible to aortic stenosis. It can be very dangerous if this gets very late stage. So a cardiac surgeon can replace that with a prosthetic valve. Which many people need, and I take care of lots of patients that have that. If you're living with aortic stenosis, your left ventricle is working too hard because it's working through too much pressure. Stenosis means tightening of the valve area. So your left ventricle is working way too hard, and again, fluid starts backing up into your lungs. And then if you have aortic regurgitation or aortic insufficiency, you have too much. Now you have an inefficient pump. Your heart is doing all this work that it shouldn't be doing because it has the incompetent valve. So let's move to the mitral valve. The mitral valve is the valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So the mitral valve opens up during diastole. When your heart relaxes, it opens up from the atrium and it dumps all the blood into the ventricle to get ready to pump it out to the aorta. And then when the left ventricle pumps, the mitral valve closes, and then the aortic valve opens, and the blood goes out that way. So again, you can have mitral valve stenosis, or you can have mitral valve regurgitation. And if it's so significant and you have so many symptoms, you might have a surgeon that comes in and needs to either repair that. There's various things they can do to repair that valve, or they replace it entirely. The data usually is now supported that it's usually better to just repair that rather than to replace it. And then the next valve is the tricuspid valve, which is the valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle. Again, it does kind of the same thing that the mitral valve does. It opens up during right ventricular diastole, so it opens up, it allows all the blood to come in, and then it closes during systole, and then the right ventricle contracts. Very, very common is tricuspid regurgitation, where blood is flowing back out when it shouldn't during regurgitation. And that causes all sorts of inefficiencies, and it can be a real problem. And you can have a surgeon that needs to go in and repair or replace that. And then the last valve is the pulmonic valve. That's the valve. This is similar to the aortic valve, but on the right side of the heart. It's the valve between the right side, the right ventricle, and the pulmonary artery, which is on its way to the lungs. Now, singular pulmonic valve issues are not as common. If someone has a problem with their pulmonic valve, it's usually congenital. They usually have a congenital heart disease that has made it a problem. It's usually not a valve that's susceptible to just random, like getting too stenotic or regurgitation in just an otherwise healthy adult. It's not that common of a thing. So it's usually a disease of a cardiac pediatric disease, or an adult who has congenital pediatric disease when that valve needs to be repaired or replaced. All right, so moving on, let's talk about, I already touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about the vessels to the heart. the coronary arteries. That's what they're called, the coronary arteries. And there's two main coronary arteries. There's the left coronary arteries and there's the right coronary arteries. And they branch out into major arteries, and then they feed the whole heart. Now, you can get atherosclerosis anywhere along the coronary arteries. Atherosclerosis is the deposition of plaques from fatty materials that builds up in the inner walls of the vessels. You can get atherosclerosis anywhere in your body, any artery in your body. You can get them in your carotid arteries, which are the arteries that go up to your brain. You can get them in your, all along your aorta. You can get them in your vessels in your legs, things like that. So that's what we mean when we say coronary artery disease, is atherosclerosis, and obviously that limits blood flow to your heart. And so, having brought it up, what is a heart attack? I can't believe I'm 20 minutes into talking about the heart and I haven't even talked about a heart. What is a heart attack? When someone has a heart attack, what is a heart attack? So obviously that's not like CHF, congestive heart failure, right? Congestive heart failure is like a spectrum. Heart attack is something that happens. It's an attack. It happens right now. Another word for it is myocardial ischemia, an MI, or an infarct. MI means myocardial infarct. Infarct just means stoppage of blood flow. So that's when you have a plaque inside your coronary arteries that opens up and it bleeds. You can have thrombosis that opens up and it causes sudden stoppage of blood flow to your heart. It can be suddenly fatal. It depends, right? If you have an issue right at one of the main coronary arteries, that could kill you, or it could happen more downstream in one of the arteries that breaks off them, and then it's a blood flow that's responsible for less of the cardiac muscle. So maybe it's not as severe if you have a heart attack. That's why someone can have a heart attack and they recover and they're fine, or someone can die instantly from a heart attack. It just depends on where that rupture is happening. So, and this is the essence. This is what cardiovascular disease is. Cardiac meaning the heart, and vascular meaning the vessels. And this is what coronary artery disease is. So when someone has bypass surgery or a CABG, sometimes it's called a CABG, C-A-B-G. That stands for coronary artery bypass graft. Or someone would be like, you'd be like, oh, my dad had a 3-vessel bypass surgery yesterday because they had a heart attack or whatever. The bypass means they're bypassing. It means the surgeon's cracking open your chest, and they're bypassing the lesion of the coronary artery where that plaque is. They're bypassing it. They're grafting in a new vessel to bypass it, to provide blood flow to your heart. That's what it is. That's what bypass surgery is. And now, don't confuse that with bypass, cardiopulmonary bypass, because also when someone is on this, they go on cardiopulmonary bypass, which is kind of like ECMO, where we have like a heart machine that pumps for you while the surgeon does their work. Anyway, whatever. So and a surgeon can either take one of your veins out of your legs, they can take an artery out of your arm, or they can take an artery that's higher in your chest, the mammary arteries, and they do these amazing things where they can graft in and bypass and they're plumbers, they redo the plumbing of the vessels to your heart. And that's what that is. That's to help with your coronary artery disease. Now, getting a stent, what is a stent? That's when you do have this coronary artery disease. You have a plaque somewhere, but an interventional cardiologist goes in and they place like a stent, either a bare metal stent or a drug-eluting stent that helps it so it doesn't clot off where that plaque is, to just open that space up. And these are decisions that are made by cardiologists and cardiothoracic surgeons about what is the right way to do. Put in a stent or go. Generally, if you're having surgery, you have severe disease. You have like multi-vessel severe disease. So that's kind of the basics of things that can happen in your vessels. There's other things that can happen in your vessels. You can have like anomalous origins of your coronary vessels. You can have something called SCAD. In fact, I should touch on that for a minute. SCAD stands for spontaneous coronary artery dissection. Your coronary arteries dissect. What does dissect mean? It means part of the inner layer of the vessel tears away from the outer layer of the vessel. That's really dangerous, right? That can stop blood flow. It can cause clotting, and it's very dangerous. You can die suddenly of it. And this is called SCAD, spontaneous coronary artery dissection. It's not really understood why it happens. And here's the other weird thing about it. It mostly affects women. Mostly women get SCAD. SCAD only occurs in 10 to 15% of men. Of all SCAD, it's usually just 10 to 15. The rest are women. And it's usually women between ages 40 and 50. And it can happen just suddenly. And so if the patient survives, they need to immediately go to cardiac surgery and have a cardiac surgeon bypass the arteries. But they can also have stenting done, but usually need some sort of revascularization, meaning, redo those vessels. It's a very dangerous disease. Okay, and then let's move on to, so our categories are, we've talked about the muscle with congestive heart failure, mostly, and all the things that can cause congestive heart failure. We've talked about valvular disease, which was a very brief discussion, and we talked about the vessels, coronary artery disease. Now let's talk about the electrical conduction of the heart. So there's a huge category of issues that can happen all along the electrical conduction system of the heart. So as I said, the heart has its own metronome that makes sure the heart is always pumping, right? You don't control your heart. You can't stop your heart. It's not skeletal muscle. Your skeletal muscle you can control voluntarily. You don't anything do voluntarily with your heart. However, your heart also, so it has its own conduction system that I'll talk about in a moment. But it also has, it gets input from you as well, like from your brain and your nervous system. If you're familiar, your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system also activates your heart. That's like your fight or flight response or your rest and digest response. So the sympathetic, you have these nerves that come off it's usually T1 through 4, called the cardioauxiliary nerves that come off your sympathetic chain. They ramp your heart up. If you see a bear, that's what makes your heart pump faster. And then the parasympathetic response is all through the vagus nerve, which is, if you recall, is a cranial nerve that comes down. The vagus means wanderer, right? It wanders down through the mediastinum. It's okay if these vocab is not in your wheelhouse. I'm not delving that much into it, but you can look up these words later if you'd like. But the vagus nerve is responsible for the vagal tone of your heart that brings your heart down. Anyway, the heart has its own metronome, right? It's called the SA node, the sinoatrial node, and that's found in the atrium of the heart. It's in the right atrium, kind of the upper wall at the opening of the superior vena cava in the right atrium. That's the main pacemaker of your heart. But there's a lot more. So the SA node goes down and communicates with and these are nerve fibers, communicates with the atrioventricular node, the AV node. And then that comes down to the His bundle. I don't know if this is new or not to you. And the bundle of His goes down the septum of the heart. And then you have the Purkinje fibers at the apex of the heart. So basically what I'm describing is the nerves of the heart, the nervous system of the heart. And the SA node is the metronome. It's like, boom, boom, boom. This is how fast you're going to beat. This is how fast you're going to beat. And it is responsible for the concerted contraction of your heart to have, to do productive work. Now, this is where arrhythmias come in play. This is why someone has an arrhythmia. We're talking about the electrical conduction system of your heart. That's what an arrhythmia is. And there are many, many different types of arrhythmias. Some are dangerous. Some are benign. Some are like, we need to treat it, but it's not going to kill you today. There's kind of those categories. Benign arrhythmias are like PVCs, premature ventricular contractions. Premature ventricular contractions. That means the ventricle is just firing off without getting guidance from the SA node. It's just firing prematurely. Now, if you have some of those every now and then, it's not going to kill you. In fact, sometimes I feel palpitations, and I have an Apple Watch that has an EKG function. And I turn it on when I'm feeling these palpitations, and I can see the PVC. I get them every now and then, which is not a big deal. If you get PVCs, it's not a big deal. It doesn't need to be treated. If you have a bunch of PVCs in a row, then that's a problem. And that's what a Holter monitor does. You put a Holter monitor, you go home, and it monitors your rhythm for a couple of days or whatever. And a cardiologist helps to figure out if you're having any bad rhythms, like a bunch of PVCs in a row, or many, many other things. And then there's atrial fibrillation, which is where the pacemaker of your heart isn't really working in a coordinated way, and you get fibrillation of the atrium. And this is characterized by, I know it sounds redundant, irregular ventricular rhythm, because your ventricle is just kind of like, okay, I'll just kind of pump, because your ventricle can also pump without the guidance from your atria, but it's not as organized. And atrial fibrillation doesn't have any P waves usually. I'm not going to get into all that. That's the outside scope of what I want to talk about. Atrial fibrillation, the problem with it is when your atrium are just fibrillating and they're not having organized contraction, the blood kind of swirls and it gets stagnant and it can clot. So that's why someone is put on anticoagulation when they have chronic atrial fibrillation. They're put on like warfarin or something like apixaban or rivaroxaban or something like that. So a little more dangerous rhythms that can happen are, I think I've already touched on one. Ventricular fibrillation is like the most dangerous rhythm that can happen. So as opposed to atrial fibrillation, the ventricles are fibrillating. The reason you can drop dead when you do, like you lose your blood pressure when your ventricles are fibrillating, is because you're not having organized blood pressure or blood flow to your body. So your blood flow stops, and that's why basically someone is dying or they're dead. Their heart is not pumping. And that person needs to be cardioverted. They need to have a shock to their chest right away to reset the rhythm of their heart, the conduction of their heart. The whole point of shocking someone's chest is to reset the electricity of the heart in the hopes that everything will start right back again. Ventricular tachycardia is also a very dangerous rhythm. It doesn't always mean someone is coding, but meaning that like their blood pressure is gone. But it's a very dangerous rhythm, and you have to get someone out of ventricular tachycardia. That just means their ventricles are just really banging away, really, really high rates, not taking any guidance from the pacemaker at the top, and that also needs to be shocked. You can also give antiarrhythmics for that, medications like amiodarone or lidocaine or procainamide to help someone get someone out of that. Other conduction problems, there's like supraventricular tachycardia, SVT. That's where your heart is beating too fast, but it's caused by the upper chambers of your heart, like the atrium. You just have a rhythm that's cycling through over and over again. The conduction rhythm, it's not being abolished, and it's causing your heart to beat really fast with really high heart rates. It's what we describe as narrow complex, and it can be heart rates as high as 150s, 160s, 170s, 180s. Very dangerous sometimes. Someone can hold their blood pressure, but the reason you drop your blood pressure if your heart rate is too high is you're not giving your heart time to relax and fill back up with blood. So you're dropping your time in diastole. If your heart rate is always really, really high, you're not filling your chambers back up with blood, and you're not pumping blood anymore. You're not circulating, and that's why your blood pressure can drop if you have really high heart rates, whether that's from SVT, ventricular tachycardia, or AFib with RVR, which I didn't mention, rapid ventricular response. There's other conduction problems. There's like Wolff-Parkinson-White. There's prolonged QT. There's Brugada syndrome. I'm not going to get into the rest of those. I just wanted to sum it up. So there are the four basic categories I came up with here are something wrong with the muscle, something wrong with the valve, something wrong with the vessels, something wrong with the conduction system. This is just to give you just a little bit of a gestalt of there are many things that go wrong in the heart, and there's many specialties. There's a lot of people that are, there's cardiothoracic surgeons, a lot of cardiologists of varying specialties as well. There's many specialties within cardiology. There's electrophysiologists that specialize just in rhythm problems. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of reasons you can need surgery, or you don't need surgery. They can be handled, more conservatively. Anyway, I hope this brief discussion about the heart is helpful for you to put context if you have heart problems, or if you have a loved one that has heart problems, or things like that. So I'll wrap up that discussion, and I can do more organ-based system podcasts like this. Like maybe I'll do an episode about the lungs soon. Anyway, let's move on to a book discussion for this week. I'm going to do a book called Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. I talk about him a lot. I also did I think on this podcast, I did a book analysis of his other book, another book he wrote called Bullshit Jobs, which you may recall that. I forget which episode that was. But anyway, this guy's brilliant. He passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, but he's basically a brilliant anthropologist and a very unique thinker, and I highly, highly recommend his book. So let's talk about Debt, The First 5,000 Years. So to sum it up, this book in one line: war justifies making money, which justifies more war. That's kind of that's a lot of what this book is. So I scarcely read an author who completely upends how I perceive the modern economy and even the very fabric of society. That's what Graeber does. This book it's not really just about debt. It's about looking behind the curtain of the underpinnings of the global economy and exposing it for what it really is: collusion of the state and market to create a communism of the elite, where the rules of debt only apply to the impoverished. Let's explore that assertion with me. Let me just repeat that line. So the underpinnings of our global economy are actually a collusion of the state and market that creates a communism of the elite, where the rules of debt only apply to the impoverished. So first, Graeber undoes the myth of the origins of the modern economy. Economy textbooks and conventional wisdom believe that humans first bartered before developing coinage and currency. So not only is there no evidence for this, according to Graeber, there is far more anthropological evidence that early humans first used credit, which is something I had never heard before. This is not to say that bartering doesn't happen. It certainly does, but only after state currency was formed. This is an important myth to dispel because the legend of bartering suggests some sort of evolution of economies that has become refined and more equitable over time. And none of this is true. It's just a myth. It's mythological. Credit systems are as old as human beings and may even have been an important cognitive development that made human minds what they are. Before we had plastic, credit was actually nothing more or less than honor. Honor-bound societies dealt in the currency of a person's honor and offered credit predicated on maintaining honor. If a person was dishonored, they were basically shut off from the market economy and their community. Debt altogether is an incredibly nebulous concept. You think it's not, but it is. Who are we in debt to? There's this whole myth of debt. We're in debt to God, we're in debt to our mothers or our parents. Certainly we're in debt to our creditors, right? So who do we owe? There's clearly some debt that no human can possibly pay back, like to our mothers, right? You can't pay that back. So an unhappy ethos of debt, sin, and never-ending quest for redemption has become this predictably, enmeshed in the church, in whatever church it is, and by extension, the state. Debt is the underlying theology in every major world religion. A very happy coincidence for the would-be tax collector or alms collector, whenever, back in the day. So a very tangible concept of debt and the paying back of that debt became entrenched early on in human history. The problem with defining debt is the problem of defining the mechanics of society. As Graeber shrewdly points out, societies aren't actually discrete units of predetermined structures. What I mean is, there are no purely capitalistic or social societies. This is one thing why I kind of rail against ideology, we should be capitalistic, we should be socialistic. Well, we're on a spectrum. We're all both, and it's just like an exercise in futility. This constant back and forth of capitalism and socialism, it gets so tiring, and I think it's an enormous distraction. Despite what politicians would have us believe, all people and states are on a spectrum of markets and state socialism, and this is crucial to understand what debt is. Once credit and its debt was decoupled from small communities and placed in the hands of the disimpassioned banker, the myth of the perfect or divine market described by Adam Smith is used as a cudgel to the proletariat, to the labor class. Yet, on top of the rugged individualism for the poor, there is a communism of the elite. To the bankers that make the rules, debt is ethereal. It vanishes with each financial disaster fabricated by its own financiers. To the labor class, debt is the inexorable clock of death hanging over our heads, right? There are no free markets, but, only state privatized markets that enjoy broad latitude to create speculative markets who are then bailed out when they destroy those markets and put the global economy at risk. That's the reality. All markets are actually fake, and all people actually live in a communistic hierarchy where you enjoy the benefits of your station that you're in, likely from happenstance. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. There's an important question. Why did coinage arise? The answer is war. You can't pay mercenaries in cows. Cows are hard to transport. So ancient wars fought with mercenary armies. Ancient wars that fought with mercenary armies were paid in state coinage, which served two purposes. A convenient way to finance warfare and a way to legitimize the state. That's kind of sounding familiar even today. So let's flash forward to the 1970s and one very important event. Nixon, finally decoupled the dollar from the gold reserve. There was a monumental event in human history, when he did this. Nixon created a free-floating fiat currency whose value is purely political and directly related to empire dominance. Like ancient kingdoms paying their mercenaries in coinage, the U.S. has the most expansive military-industrial complex that the world's ever seen. A pointillistic U.S. empire is strewn across the globe, ready to mobilize firepower on any spot on the planet at any moment. The question is, if the U.S. dollar now has no intrinsic value, why then is it so freaking valuable? Or so powerful, I should say. It's not the most valuable currency, right? The answer is that the U.S. maintains global dominance through its war machine. Here's another very important question. Why are Iran and Iraq mortal enemies to the U.S.? We could speculate, or we could arrive at the obvious answer. They decided to sell petroleum in something other than the U.S. dollar. Anyway, I digress. The U.S. creates debt to fund its wars, knowing full well it does not have to pay this debt back. Right? The U.S. government does not have to pay its debt back because of its global dominance. And if you believe that the deficit is akin to something like household debt, you've been manipulated by a politician. What is really going on is that China is buying up U.S. bonds with its enormous trade surplus that it maintains by suppressing the labor force, which is another topic, and this creates, quote, debt, or the deficit. But this debt is nothing more or less than China paying tribute to the global U.S. empire. If you reframe it, you can reframe it that way. Of course, this is not real debt, and it never has to be paid back. If China were to cash in its bonds, its economy would likely instantly collapse. China is never going to do this. So what we have is a militarization of capitalism that maintains the dominance of the U.S. dollar and the credit systems that flow from it. Those that control the debt never actually have to pay debt, where the labor class is seen as sinful and lazy for being laden with onerous debt, the most of which comes from healthcare spending, which is another topic. In the end, state and market capitalism are two wings of the same thing, the two being inseparable and guaranteed by the military-industrial complex that constantly creates demand for the dollar while asserting the dollar's global dominance. So why are things this way? Is this the natural evolution of global economies? My answer is no. This was a very deliberate decision made in the 1970s and 80s, also influenced by the Bretton Woods Conference after World War II and how the U.S. controls the IMF, another topic. But this is all backed by the neoliberal policies of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Human beings created this mess, not an invisible hand. If we made the world to look like this, we can unmake it to not look like this. It comes to no surprise that I've mentioned before, Graeber is an anarchist, which is like, anarchism. I'm no expert on anarchism, but from what I understand, it's true decentralization of power and the economy with communal ownership over market goods and over an industry. Freedom is nothing more or less than power, and whoever has power enjoys freedom. It's time we step back and re-examine for whom exactly our laws are ensuring freedom. Spoiler alert, it's not you. Anyway, there you have it. That's my kind of analysis and talking about the concepts from this book. It's called Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. I also highly recommend his other book that I mentioned, Bullshit Jobs. I would put these two books on the very top of your list. You'll learn a lot. All right, I think that's all the time I have today for this podcast. As always, let me know what you think. My email is icudoctorecmo, ecmo@gmail.com. Email me about anything. Email me if you have questions. Email me if you're like, hey, can you do a whole podcast about this? And I will do it. I will respond to emails more than any other social media platform because I know people who are emailing me are the people that are likely listening to this podcast, and I want to make this podcast, for you and respond to you. And if you have specific questions, I would jump to answer those on this podcast. Let me know, if you have ideas, if the content structure, if I should talk about other things, I'm willing to talk about anything. This is just a free-flowing thing. I'm on TikTok, ICU Doctor is my handle. I'm on Instagram. My handle is, I always forget it. What is it on Instagram? It's ICU Doctor TikTok on Instagram. I always forget. And then write a review, because I guess that's good. And that's it. Thanks. See you next week.